My grandson came up from the basement, pale as a ghost. His hands were trembling, his voice breaking. "Grandma, pack a bag. We're leaving. Don't call anyone." I thought he was joking until I saw his eyes, empty, terrified. I asked, "What's wrong?" He said, "Please just trust me." 20 minutes later, we were speeding down the coastal highway and my phone wouldn't stop ringing. My children were calling over and over. But when I reached for it, my grandson whispered, "Don't answer them." That was the moment I realized I didn't really know my own family anymore. Before I share my story, I want to know you are here with me. Just say listening in the comments or tell me where you are. I love hearing how far my story can reach. Sometimes even the smallest connection can make a story feel heard. Thank you. And now, here's my story. And if this story touches you in any way, please consider subscribing to our channel, Never Too Old. Every story here reminds us that life doesn't end at heartbreak. It begins again in the most unexpected ways. My name is Leora Halden, and this is the day my grandson saved me from my own home. The nights had become heavy lately, thick with silence, and something else I couldn't name. I would wake before dawn, heart pounding the room, spinning in a gray haze. The air inside my bedroom felt thinner each morning, as if the house itself were holding its breath. I blamed age, 67. Maybe that was all it was. My late husband Jonas used to joke that I worried too much. "The sea breeze here keeps you young," he'd say, hammer in hand, building this house with nothing but sweat and stubborn love. That was 5 years ago. Now his chair sat empty. His tools hung neatly in the shed, and I lived alone in the wooden house he built on Hastings Hill, overlooking the misty shore of Port Townsend. He'd called it the house that breathes. Every window vent and plank had been placed to let the ocean air flow through so it'll never feel trapped, he said. I never thought I'd be the one gasping for air. Over the past 2 months, I'd lost weight without trying. My appetite vanished. Sometimes, when I stood too quickly, black dots filled my vision. The doctor said my blood showed traces of carbon monoxide. He told me to check my detector. I had. It beeped just fine. When my son Caleb stopped by a mechanical engineer at North Pier Energy, he looked around the house like a man inspecting an old machine. "It's probably just leaks in the heating," he said. "This system's ancient mom. You're wasting money. I'll seal some vents and make it more efficient." I didn't argue. He was the expert. Naomi, my daughter, came the next day. She worked in insurance, always dressed sharp, always talking about risk management. She suggested a new CO detector, and a week later, Caleb brought one, sleek, white, expensive looking. "Best one on the market," he said, installing it above my bed. Still, the headaches worsened. Sometimes, standing by the kitchen sink, I'd catch a faint metallic smell, almost like exhaust. I'd open a window, but the air outside felt just as heavy. Jonas would have hated it. He used to say a sealed house was a dead one. That morning, the sound came, again a faint click under my bedroom floor. I froze. Then a subtle wave of warmth rose through the boards, not like sunlight, but something artificial. I bent down, touched the wood. Warm, but not from heat, from air. I told myself not to be silly. Still, my hands shook as I reached for the phone. That was when I saw Evan's truck pull up outside. My grandson, Caleb's son, 25, same solid frame as Jonas. He always brought noise and warmth into this too quiet house. He came to fix the kitchen cabinet Jonas had built decades ago. "It's sticking again," I said, and he smiled, pulling out the old oak toolbox his grandfather had left him. "Let's make it breathe again, Grandma," he said. When he went down to the basement to grab some screws, I heard him moving things around. Then silence. Minutes passed, the kind of silence that feels wrong. When he finally came up, his face was ghost white, his hands trembling. "Grandma," he said quietly, "pack a bag. We're leaving. Don't call anyone." "What? Why? What's wrong?" He looked at me, eyes wide, terrified. "Please, just trust me." I didn't understand, but something in his voice, the urgency, the fear, made me obey. I packed a small suitcase with my medicine, my wallet, and Jonas's photo from the nightstand. 20 minutes later, we were driving down Hastings Hill. My phone buzzed again and again. Caleb. Then Naomi. Then Caleb again. I reached for it. "Don't answer," Evan said, gripping the wheel. His knuckles were white. "We're not safe." The house disappeared in the rearview mirror, swallowed by fog. I didn't know it then, but Jonas's house that breathes had been turned into a machine built to kill me. Evan didn't speak for a long time. The only sounds were the rain tapping the windshield and the low hum of the truck's engine. After 40 minutes of driving, he turned into a small diner along the coastal road. Keystone Diner, the kind of place that smelled like coffee and old memories. We sat in the far booth. Through the window, I could still see Hastings Hill in the distance, faint behind the fog. My home looked like a shadow now. I felt hollow inside, like something had been pulled out of me. Evan slid his phone across the table. "You need to see this." I looked down. Photos filled the screen pipe's copper fittings, a timer box, and wires snaking into the furnace line. "This is under your bedroom," he said quietly. "Someone installed a release valve that leaks carbon monoxide whenever the heat turns on. It's wired to a timer." I shook my head, my throat tightening. "No. Caleb fixed that system himself. He said he was sealing the vents. He wasn't fixing it," Evan said. "He was modifying it. I know his work, Grandma. This design is deliberate. It's the same programming method he used at North Pier. I wanted to believe he was wrong. Maybe it's an experiment. Maybe he was testing energy efficiency." Evan leaned forward. "This isn't efficiency. It's a trap. The vents he sealed are what keep the gas contained, and the detector he installed, it's fake. Look." He pulled something from his jacket pocket, the old CO detector he'd taken down before we left. The back was open. The battery had been soldered in place dead. I couldn't breathe. I remembered Caleb pressing the test button weeks ago, the beep echoing through the room. "See, Mom. It works." I had smiled and believed him. Evan reached across the table. This wasn't an accident. My mind spiraled back 2 months to the day I fainted in the bathroom. The ambulance lights, the hospital room, the young doctor telling me about carbon monoxide. Caleb arriving in his work uniform, talking to the doctor outside where I couldn't hear. When he came back, he'd said softly, "You probably left your car running in the garage." But my garage wasn't even attached to the house. I barely drove anymore. The waitress came by with 2 cups of coffee. I wrapped my hands around mine for warmth, but didn't drink. Evan was scrolling through his phone again, his jaw tight. "North Pier Energy laid off 1/3 of its staff last quarter," he said. "Dad was one of them. They cut the senior engineers first." I stared at him, trying to process. Caleb hadn't said a word. He told me he was busier than ever. "Because he was lying," Evan said. "He's been hiding it from everyone. And Naomi, she works in life insurance, right?" "Yes." He looked at me steadily. "If something happened to you, your estate would split between them. $500,000 each, at least. Naomi knows how to file claims. She'd make sure it looked natural." I remembered Naomi's voice over dinner a few weeks ago, half joking. "If you ever go peacefully in your sleep, Mom, at least I'll know how to handle the paperwork." Everyone had laughed. I had laughed too. Now the sound of that laugh felt like a blade. I pressed a hand to my chest. "No, Evan, they wouldn't." He shook his head. "We can't risk it. We need evidence before they realize we're gone." Outside, a truck drove slowly past the diner, its headlights cutting through the fog. I saw a dark sedan behind it, the same kind Caleb drove. Evan noticed it too. He stood up, tossed cash on the table. "We can't stay here." We left through the side door, walking quickly to the truck. I glanced once more toward the hill. Through the mist, my house looked peaceful, almost innocent. Evan started the engine, his voice low but firm. "We'll get a room for the night. Pay in cash, no phones." At the motel, Anchor Light, an old 2-story building with flickering signs, he checked us in under a false name. Room 106. The carpet smelled like damp salt and cleaner. As I sat on the edge of the bed, Evan locked the door and turned to me. "Grandma, listen. Whatever happens next, you can't contact Dad or Naomi. Not until we have proof. Promise me." I nodded, though the words felt like they scraped my throat. "I promise." He looked out the window, the neon light from the motel sign flickering across his face. "They think they've trapped you," he said softly, "but they don't know. I was paying attention." I watched him, this boy who looked so much like Jonas, steady and brave, and for the first time I felt the tiniest flicker of hope. Still deep down, a thought whispered through me like the cold wind outside. What kind of mother raises children capable of murder, and what kind of house teaches them how to do it? The motel room felt too still, like the air had been waiting for bad news. Room 203 overlooked an empty parking lot where the only movement came from a flickering street lamp and the slow pulse of the ocean beyond. Evan sat by the desk, the glow of his laptop washing his face pale. I sat near the window, watching the mist roll and the smell of salt seeping through the cracks of the old glass. When Jonas was alive, the world never felt this silent. He'd wake before dawn, pull on his work boots, and whistle down the hall. He used to say every house had a heartbeat if you knew how to listen for it. He'd taught Evan that. I could still see the two of them on the porch, Jonas guiding Evan's small hands over the handle of a chisel shaping wood, as if it were something alive. Caleb had stood off to the side back then, pretending not to care, flipping through an engineering magazine like he was too smart for sweat and sawdust. Now, it was Caleb's son saving me. While Caleb himself... I didn't even know what word fit anymore. Evan cleared his throat. "Grandma," he said, eyes locked on the screen. "Dad was laid off 3 months ago. He didn't tell anyone. North Pier's restructuring. The whole senior division was cut." My stomach turned cold. He didn't say a word. He came over every week like nothing had changed. "He's behind on the mortgage too," Evan added. "And Naomi, her husband's dialysis meds cost over $3,000 a month. They're drowning in debt. Between them, they owe more than $200,000. The number made me dizzy. My house was worth close to $900,000. I owned it outright. They'd split it," I whispered, if something happened." Evan didn't respond. He just looked at me, his silence heavy enough to answer everything. I turned away from him, staring out into the fog where the faint outline of Hastings Hill rose above the water. My mind went to that night before Jonas died. We'd been sitting on the porch, the wind strong enough to rattle the shutters. He'd said, "If there's ever a day this house stops breathing, Leora, don't wait for me. Leave." Back then, I thought he was talking about grief. Now it sounded like a warning. Evan rubbed his eyes. "There's more." He told me about something he remembered from 2 weeks earlier. He'd gone to his parents' house to help move boxes. While he was in the kitchen, he overheard Caleb talking on the phone. "Just keep her comfortable," his father had said. "Once she's asleep, everything will settle." Evan had assumed they were talking about my sleeping pills, but now those words cut different. A car engine broke the silence outside. Evan moved to the window. "Don't look," he said quietly. I froze, but curiosity got the better of me. A dark sedan sat across the street, headlights off. Someone was inside. The engine was running. I couldn't see their face, only the faint reflection of sunglasses against the glass. Evan's voice dropped. "That's the same car that was parked by your house the day I came over." We stayed like that for a long time, not speaking, not breathing too loudly until the car finally pulled away. When he sat down again, the chair creaked. "They know we're alive," he said. "They'll figure out soon that we're not going back." The fear inside me turned to something sharper clarity. Your father built that system to kill me. Saying it out loud made the air feel colder. Evan looked at me with a mix of pity and determination. "Tomorrow morning, I'm going back. I'll get your health log. It's proof, dates, symptoms, everything. If we take it to the police, they'll have to listen." I grabbed his arm. "No, if he sees you, he won't," Evan said. "I'll be careful." "Evan, please," my voice cracked. "You're all I have left." He smiled faintly. and I plan to stay that way. That night, neither of us slept. I sat by the window watching the fog grow thicker until the world disappeared. Somewhere in that gray stillness, I realized the cruelest truth of all. I wasn't afraid of dying anymore. I was afraid of the people I had given life to. Morning arrived with a dull gray light that seeped through the blinds. Evan packed a small bag, camera gloves, flashlight, and the old key Jonas had made decades ago. I sat on the edge of the bed, holding my phone in both hands. "Call me when you're there," I said. He nodded, kissed my forehead, and was gone. The parking lot looked empty, but the same dark sedan was parked at the far corner. Its windows were tinted, now the driver invisible. I pretended not to notice, pretending harder than I ever had in my life. Hours felt like days. The phone stayed silent. I tried to drink coffee, but couldn't swallow it. Every creak of the motel walls made me flinch. Then finally, my phone buzzed. Evan's message. Inside. All clear. He'd used Jonas's old key. The house was just as he'd left it, quiet, too quiet. In the basement, he found a new steel canister hooked into the furnace line. A fresh pipe ran up toward the vents beneath my bedroom floor. On the workbench, Caleb's handwriting sprawled across blueprints and diagrams. CO injection module. Test successful. Evan took photos quickly. Every angle. Every label. He whispered into the camera for record. Then tires crunched outside. He ducked behind the staircase, heartbeat loud enough to hear. Through the crack of the railing, he saw his father's boots step inside. Caleb's voice echoed through the hall. "If she's still alive by the weekend, it's over." "You hear me?" Naomi's voice answered, trembling. "Evan's suspicious. You need to handle it before he ruins everything." Evan clenched his fists, every instinct screaming to move, but he stayed hidden, recording every word. A moment later, Caleb's phone rang. "Yes," he said into it, pacing. "No, she hasn't called anyone." "Good. Keep watching the motel. If they leave, tell me first." When he stepped outside, Naomi stayed behind. Evan could hear her crying softly. "I didn't want this," she whispered. "But Paul's dying. His insurance won't cover another year." What was I supposed to do? Caleb's voice came faintly from outside. "You were supposed to save us. All of us. If she dies, we survive." Evan pressed a hand to his mouth, his heart breaking as much as it was racing. He hadn't come to hear confessions, he'd come for proof. But this was worse than proof, it was damnation. He crept toward the workbench, slid the camera's memory card into his pocket, and turned to leave. His shoulder brushed against a piece of lumber leaning on the wall. It clattered to the ground. The sound was small but sharp in the still air. Footsteps thundered overhead. "Who's down there?" Caleb shouted. Evan bolted toward the back door, his boots slipping on the concrete. He heard the basement door slam open behind him, his father's voice closing in. "I know it's you, Evan. Stop." He didn't. He burst through the side exit and into the cold morning fog. Branches whipped his face as he tore through the trees, the echo of his father's footsteps fading behind him. When he reached the main road, a pickup slowed, and he waved frantically. The driver, a stranger, let him climb in. He didn't stop shaking the whole ride back. When he finally opened the door to the motel room, I was standing there half out of my chair, the phone pressed to my ear. A man's voice had just spoken on the other end. "Mrs. Halden," it said. "Has your grandson come back yet?" I asked who it was, but the line went dead. Evan stepped inside, breathing hard dirt streaked across his shirt. His eyes darted to the window, to the parking lot outside. The dark sedan was gone. "They know," he said quietly. Who, I asked. He swallowed, his voice shaking. "Dad. Naomi. Maybe both. They know we're here." For a moment, the world shrank to the sound of the ocean, the thrum of the air conditioner, and the pounding of my heart. The walls of the motel seemed to close in. Evan locked the door, pulled the curtains shut, and looked straight at me. "Grandma." He said, "We have to disappear." And for the first time since Jonas died, I didn't argue, because deep down I knew whatever was coming next would either save us or finish what my children had started. By noon, the rain had settled into a fine mist, soft enough to blur the edges of everything. Evan moved quickly, packing our things with silent precision. He slipped the USB drive and the tiny memory card into his jacket, checked the parking lot twice, then nodded for me to follow. The air outside smelled of salt and diesel. I kept my coat tight as we stepped into the truck. He started the engine, and the moment we pulled onto the road, I saw it, the same dark sedan at the far end of the street, its headlights low, steady, unhurried. "They've found us," I whispered. "Let's see how long they can keep up," Evan said. We took the long route toward downtown Port Townsend, following the curve of Water Street where gulls perched on lampposts and tourists with umbrellas walked along the shops that faced the harbor. Every time we changed lanes, the black car did the same. My heart thudded against my ribs. At the intersection near the ferry dock, Evan made a sharp right. "Hold on," he muttered. The truck fishtailed slightly on the wet pavement, then steadied. The sedan followed, closing the gap. I caught a glimpse through the windshield. Caleb was behind the wheel. His face was pale and set like stone. Evan kept driving toward the pier, pretending to head for the ferry terminal. Then, at the last second, he veered left into an access road that led to the freight yard behind the marina. Crates, forklifts, and stacked shipping containers lined the narrow lane. The rain thickened the world, turning silver and gray. Just as we thought we'd lost him, another vehicle blocked the way ahead, a silver pickup. The driver's door opened and Naomi stepped out. Her hair was drenched her coat, dark with rain. She raised both hands. "Evan, stop. Please don't make me do this." Evan braked hard tires, skidding on the slick asphalt. The truck stopped a few yards from her. I could see the terror in her eyes. "I don't want to hurt anyone," she said, shouting over the rain. "Caleb's lost it. If we don't stop him, he'll destroy everything." Evan didn't lower the window. "Why should we trust you?" he called out. "Because he's not thinking straight," Naomi said, voice cracking. "He said, if Mom doesn't die, we'll lose the house, the insurance, everything. He'll go to prison. I thought I could help him, but I can't. He'll kill her, Evan. He'll kill all of us." I stepped out before Evan could stop me. The rain hit my face, cold and relentless. "Naomi," I said softly, "if what you're saying is true, come with us. Tell the police." Her lips trembled. "You don't understand. He's already done too much." That was when the roar of another engine filled the air. Caleb's sedan came skidding around the corner, splashing water over the pavement. He slammed the door open, yelling, "Get away from her," and shoved Naomi aside. Evan jumped out his jacket, half-zipped, gripping the evidence bag. Caleb lunged, snatching at it. The USB flew from Evan's hand and landed in a puddle, sinking into the oily water. Caleb shoved him backward, eyes blazing. "You have no idea what I've lost because of her," he shouted, pointing at me. "She left me nothing but a broken dream and a house full of ghosts." Evan tried to push past him, but Caleb pulled something from his pocket, a stun gun. I heard the metallic click, the low hum of electric charge. I froze. And then, like some miracle, a patrol car rolled up behind us. Its siren wasn't on, but the flashing lights cut through the gray rain. A young officer stepped out, looking annoyed. "Everything all right here?" Caleb's stiffened eyes darting between us and the cop. Without a word, he dropped the stun gun into the puddle, turned back toward his car, and drove off fast. The officer, distracted by a minor fender bender up the street, barely noticed. Naomi stood shivering, mascara streaked down her face. She leaned in close and whispered, "Go to his old office, North Pier Storage Warehouse number 3. You'll understand everything there." She pressed a small electronic key into my palm, then ran to her truck before I could respond. That night, the rain stopped. We returned to the motel to find the door slightly ajar. The lights were off. On the table sat a brown envelope. Inside, a single note in rough handwriting read, "Don't dig any deeper. If you're alive, be grateful." Evan crumpled the paper in his fist. "Tomorrow night," he said quietly, "we're going to find out the truth." The North Pier Industrial Complex stood like a skeleton under the night sky. Rusted fences lined the perimeter, the wind moaning through broken vents. Somewhere inside, one warehouse still glowed with a faint yellow light. Building 3, the place where Caleb once worked. Evan and I parked a block away, our breaths visible in the cold air. "Stay behind me," he whispered. He scanned the gate, swiped the keycard Naomi had given us, and the side door clicked open. The air inside smelled of chemicals and dust. Rows of equipment lined the walls, tanks wiring half-built prototypes. A computer monitor still glowed on the central table, displaying charts and graphs. I stepped closer. Across the screen were the words, CO Saturation Timeline. Subject F, 67 war-hours old. Beneath it, notes in Caleb's handwriting read Exposure Simulation 90 days. Monitored response successful. Beside the monitor pinned to a corkboard was a photo of me in my garden dated 3 months earlier. I felt my knees weaken. Evan searched the filing cabinet and pulled out a folder labeled Insurance Projection, Beneficiary Caleb and Naomi Halden. He stared at it for a long moment before whispering, "They filed it before anything even happened." I sank into a chair, numb. The hum of machinery filled the silence like static. Evan began recording with his camera, reading each page aloud for evidence. The minute he reached the laptop, a faint red light blinked near the ceiling. I noticed it too late, a motion sensor. The alarm erupted, a piercing shriek slicing through the night. Red lights flashed across the walls. "Grab the files," I yelled. But before we could move, the main door swung open. Caleb stood there, soaked in rain, holding a flashlight in one hand and the same stun gun in the other. "I didn't want this," he said evenly. "But you didn't give me a choice. I can't start over. I've lost my job, my house, my name, everything. You'd rather let it rot in that damn hill than help your own son." I stood slowly, "And your answer was to kill me." His face twisted. "You built that house to love Jonas more than any of us. You let him take every breath while we choked on his perfection." Before I could speak, another voice came from behind him. "Caleb, stop." Naomi appeared at the back entrance, hands raised. Her coat was torn, her eyes red. "It's over," she said. He turned to her, relief flashing across his face. "You're with me." She shook her head. "No, I called the police. They're on their way." His expression hardened. "You think they'll save you?" He lunged at her, the stun gun crackling. Evan swung a metal rod from the floor, hitting Caleb's arm. The weapon flew from his hand, skidding across the concrete. It struck a gas cylinder at the wall. Sparks lit the air. For a second, everything went still. Then a sharp hiss filled the room as the tank split open. "Run!" Evan shouted. We sprinted toward the exit, Naomi stumbling beside me. Behind us came the sound of shattering glass, the rush of flame. The blast threw us to the ground, outside debris raining around us. Sirens wailed from the distance, growing louder by the second. The night glowed orange as the warehouse burned. When I turned, I saw Caleb being pulled to his feet by officers, soot covering his face. As they led him to the patrol car, he looked at me through the smoke. "If you hadn't built that house," he said, voice raw, "I wouldn't have become this. You made me chase ghosts." I looked at him for a long time. "No, Caleb," I said quietly. "I built that house to keep us alive. You just stopped listening when it tried to breathe." The officers closed the door and the car drove away. I stood in the cold wind, watching the flames consume everything, the blueprints, the experiments, the lies. Somewhere in the crackle of fire, I thought I heard the sound of wood sighing like the final breath of Hastings Hill itself. Evan slipped his hand into mine. We didn't speak. The firelight flickered against his face, and for the first time in months, I exhaled without fear. 6 weeks after the explosion, I sat in the courthouse waiting room, my palms pressed against the wood of the bench, tracing the grain the way Jonas used to. The air felt heavy, almost humid, like it carried the breath of every memory I wished I could forget. I wasn't trembling from fear, at least not for myself, but from the truth that every word I was about to speak would destroy whatever was left of my family. Jefferson County Courthouse was small with narrow windows that let in stripes of light dust, floating like suspended ghosts. Outside the courtroom, reporters whispered into microphones. Inside, I could hear the shuffle of chairs, the quiet clack of handcuffs. When the bailiff opened the door, I saw my son for the first time since that night. The warehouse fire still burned behind my eyes, and there he was alive in an orange jumpsuit, his wrists bound in silver. Caleb didn't look at me at first. He only stared straight ahead, jaw-tight expression blank. Beside him sat his wife, Sienna, pale and quiet, and my daughter, Naomi, her hands folded on her lap. They both looked older. Guilt had aged them faster than time ever could. When the judge entered, everyone rose. The room went still except for the soft hum of the overhead lights. The prosecutor began to speak calm and firm. He outlined the charges: attempted murder, conspiracy, insurance fraud, and then presented the evidence, the blueprints labeled CO injection module, the video from Evan's camera, the recorded call between Caleb and Naomi discussing something they called Project Quiet Night. When my name was called, I stood. Every step toward the witness stand felt like walking through years of motherhood, every argument, every birthday, every small forgiveness that had led us here. The oath felt dry in my mouth. Mrs. Halden, the prosecutor, said you designed the house on Hastings Hill with your late husband, correct? Yes, I said. Jonas built it by hand. It was meant to breathe. He nodded. And who last modified its ventilation system? My son, Caleb. At that, I finally looked at him. His eyes met mine, cold, hard, metallic. He didn't blink. The defense attorney rose, his tone softer. Mrs. Halden, you've known your son all his life. Would you describe him as violent? I hesitated. No, not violent, but pride can be its own kind of weapon. He tried to argue that Caleb was under emotional distress, that he'd been fired unjustly, that his experiment was misinterpreted. He spoke of mental breakdowns, sleepless nights, desperation. Then the prosecutor held up a printed screenshot from Caleb's laptop. Across the top, the words, Subject F, 67 years old. Exposure simulation glared under the lights. The courtroom fell silent. When Naomi's turn came, she surprised everyone. She asked to testify separately. Her voice shook, but she didn't cry. She admitted that Caleb had pressured her to falsify insurance documents to speed up a payout. I was scared, she said, but I did it. I thought if I helped, he'd stop. Then came Sienna. She spoke barely above a whisper, recounting the night Caleb had said, if she dies in her sleep, it'll be a beautiful way to go. The judge asked if she was sure of what she heard. She nodded, and the recording Naomi had secretly made played for the court. The sound of my son's voice filled the room. I watched reporters lower their pens. Even the defense lawyer looked down. Finally, Caleb stood to speak. He didn't look remorseful, just exhausted. You always loved that house more than you loved me, he said, his voice flat. You let Dad build his dreams into its walls, but you never left space for mine. I only wanted what was supposed to be mine. I felt my throat tighten. The house was built to protect Caleb, I said quietly. Not to be owned, not to kill. You smothered what it stood for and almost smothered me with it. He turned away, but his hands clenched until the knuckles turned white. The jury deliberated for hours. When they returned, the air seemed to hold its breath. The foreman read the verdict aloud: Caleb Halden guilty of attempted murder and conspiracy to commit homicide. Sentence 18 years. Naomi Halden guilty of aiding and falsifying documents. Sentence 12 years. Sienna Halden guilty of accessory to concealment. Sentence 10 years. There was no applause, no whisper. Only the sound of Caleb being handcuffed again. As they led him away, he turned his head slightly and said just loud enough for me to hear, "You couldn't kill me either, Mom, but I killed everything you ever loved." The words hit like a cold wind. And maybe he was right. My house was gone, my children broken. But as Evan reached for my hand and squeezed, I realized he was wrong about one thing. I hadn't lost everything. The part of me that still believed in breath, in light, in life, that part survived. Outside, the sunlight hit the courthouse windows, scattering reflections across the glass. I stood with Evan watching the light dance like a new kind of air, clear, forgiving, and free. 6 months later, the house on Hastings Hill belonged to someone else. A young couple with 2 children had bought it, and I imagined the sound of laughter echoing through the halls that had once carried silence and fear. I hoped they would let the wind in, the way Jonas intended. I had moved to a small apartment in Port Orchard, 3rd floor, facing the sea. The air smelled of paint and salt, and when the sun rose, it turned the walls pale gold. Evan helped me unpack carrying boxes of things that had survived the fire, old photographs, Jonas's tools, and the oak cabinet he built in our first year of marriage. When we lifted the cabinet against the kitchen wall, something shifted. A faint rattle from inside caught my attention. Evan unscrewed the back panel and found a small hidden compartment. Inside was a letter, its edges yellowed with age. The date read June 12th, 1984. I unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was Jonas's strong, deliberate. If the house ever stops breathing, it said, don't mourn it. Its breath lives in you. I didn't realize I was crying until a tear fell onto the paper, blurring his signature. For the first time in years, I felt something loosen inside me. Not grief exactly, but release. A week later, a letter arrived from the prison. It was from Naomi. She apologized not for what she'd done, but for forgetting who she used to be. She wrote that she'd testified again to help reduce Sienna's sentence, and she hoped one day I might forgive her. I didn't respond, but I folded her letter carefully and placed it beside Jonas's. Another letter came days later. The handwriting was Caleb's, sharp and uneven. It contained only one line. Your house is dead, but maybe I am too. I folded it once, then again, and put it away without anger. Some silences are answers in themselves. Spring came. Evan visited often, always bringing something to fix or build. One afternoon he arrived with a woman named Sabine, an artist who worked with clay. She showed me a small sculpture she'd made, a miniature house hollow inside with a tiny slit along one wall. For air, she said. Every home needs breath. I smiled for the first time in months. Jonas would have liked her. As the sun dipped low that evening, the apartment filled with golden light. It spilled across the oak cabinet, tracing every groove and knot in the wood. I reached out and touched it, feeling warmth radiate from something long gone, but still alive in memory. The sea wind slipped through the half-open window, stirring the curtains. I closed my eyes and listened to the faint creak of wood, to Evan and Sabine's laughter from the balcony, to the steady rhythm of my own breathing. The house was gone, but its soul had found another home. We cannot save everyone we love, but we can keep the honest parts of them alive in the smallest things: a letter, a touch, a piece of wood that remembers the shape of a hand. Jonas built with his hands, Evan builds with his heart, and I with memory. When the light faded, I left one lamp on. Its glow brushed across the cabinet, the shadows of the grain moving like slow breaths. Some houses, I whispered, breathe forever.